Welcome to the Creative Force Podcast, a podcast all about empowering you to live in your God-given identity and go after the dreams in your heart. I'm your host, Sharon Stark, and every week we'll be having powerful conversations that will combine practical and biblical wisdom for living your purpose. Let's get started. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Creative Force Podcast. I'm here today with Courtney Anderson. Courtney and I go way back, all the way back to 2006, where we first met at Youth with a Mission, also known as YWAM. And even all the way back then, I just remember being so impressed with the wisdom that Courtney has. And so I know that you guys, as the listeners, are really going to get a lot out of today's talk. Welcome, Courtney. Can you share a little bit about yourself with us?
My name is Courtney Anderson, and I was born and raised in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And then, like Sharon said, I did a missionary training school with Youth with a Mission in 2006, right out of high school. And I'd known I wanted to be in missions since I was 13. So this seemed like kind of a logical next step for me, and then ended up feeling called by the Lord to join staff there. So I worked with Youth with a Mission in Pittsburgh for about 2 years. Then I took a little break and I went to cosmetology school. And then I ended up in Thailand for 6 months working with women in prostitution. And then God called me kind of out of that in that direct way and back to Pittsburgh, where I started a cosmetology-focused missionary training school. That's like a 5-month long program. And then, so I did that for about 7 or so years. And then in 2020, joined a pioneering team that was launching a base or a location, a Youth with a Mission location in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So I've been in Philadelphia for the last 3 years.
That is awesome. And we're talking about YWAM. So for those listeners who don't know what Youth with a Mission is, can you kind of explain what's the purpose behind YWAM?
Yeah, so Youth with a Mission is, so they call it a movement as opposed to an organization, just because it is decentralized. So we don't actually have like a headquarters. They have a University of the Nations through it. They run missionary training schools. They have mercy ministries. So it's mercy ministries, training, and evangelism. Those are kind of our 3 big pushes. And so each location, which we call bases, operate kind of independently from one another. But we run a program called a discipleship training school, which we call DTS because we love acronyms, and YWAM, or Youth with a Mission. And so that's kind of the thing that holds us all together, because in order to be part of Youth with a Mission in any capacity, whether it's attending one of their university programs or whatever, you do that first entry level school of the discipleship training school. So it's 3 months where for me, I did my first 3 months in Pittsburgh, or outside of Pittsburgh, but at the Pittsburgh base. And then 2 months is an overseas outreach. But there's bases, I believe there's like 175 bases or more all over the world, with hundreds of thousands of staff. And it's international and interdenominational. So there's not any one specific denomination represented. We also are all self-supported. So we do fundraising. We're not paid by the organization. We do fundraising. So our own support base, whether it's family, friends, churches, kind of provides our funding. So all of those things kind of keep us very much in that movement mentality.
Yeah, that's awesome. You mentioned at 13, you knew that you were supposed to go into missions. Mm-hmm. What was kind of like the process in that, like how you knew that was something that the Lord was leading you into? And then what made you actually decide to go to YWAM?
So I grew up in the Baptist church, and most Baptist churches are relatively known for being missionally focused.
Yeah.
And so grew up North American Baptist, to be more specific. And so that denomination is no exception to that idea of world missions. And so I had heard about missions since I could remember. Like, I knew what a missionary was from a very young age. And I remember when I was 8, actually, there was this woman named Moni Fluth, and she had been a missionary to Cameroon and Nigeria for 30 years, and she was retired at this point, and she would share in our, like, we had a kids program on Wednesday nights, and she shared, and I remember thinking at that point that I kind of wanted to do it. And then I went off in a million different directions and wanted to be everything from like a marine biologist to a lawyer.
I can relate to wanting to like be so many things very much.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, I want to be everything. And then when I was 12, I ended up having to have open heart surgery, actually. And that was a very big wake up call for me, as a small, like, as much of a wake up call as you can have as a girl who grew up in a Christian home at 12. Yeah, at that point, I got really angry at God, because in my head, God should have just made my life easy because my family was good and I felt like I was a good kid or whatever. And so, but that summer, after having open heart surgery, I ended up going to a missions trip, and which was actually in my hometown. I grew up in the inner city of Minneapolis. A lot of the kids I went to church with were from more suburban areas. So my youth leader decided we needed to do a missions trip to the inner city of Minneapolis, which to me was like, these are kids I go to school with, but sure, we'll do a missions trip here. I was not thrilled. And then after that, I ended up going to a youth conference with our denomination, and a lot of different missionaries spoke at this. It's called NAB Triennial Youth Conference, and a bunch of different missionaries. And there was one woman in particular who was 28, and she was working with street kids in Romania. And they had this like altar call, but not for salvation. It was an altar call. Do you feel called into missions? And in that moment, I just really felt the Holy Spirit, even though as a Baptist, didn't really know that's what I was feeling at the time. But really felt the Holy Spirit and knew like this was something that this was what I wanted to do. This is what I was giving my life to. And so from that point on, I knew anytime anyone asked me, what are you going to do? It was, I'm going to be a missionary. And so I knew I wanted to do missions, but in, growing up in like a very traditional mindset of missions, I thought, okay, that means you're a medical, teacher, or preacher. Like these are the three different kind of veins you can go into and enter into missions. So in my head, I was going to be a teacher because medical sounded terrible, and I had no desire to be a preacher. And you couldn't be in the North American Baptist Association either. So it wasn't an option. And so, but being a missionary requires like 4 years of your undergrad and then 2 years of seminary. At that point, I had never been overseas, and I was thinking, I need to make sure I like traveling before I commit 6 years of my life to a degree with the intent of traveling. And so I used to work at a Christian summer camp every year, Village Creek Bible Camp in Iowa. And they would have missions moments all the time. And so there was a girl, she actually went to my church, but she shared in a missions moment about her experience with Youth with a Mission and her discipleship training school. And I thought, that's it. That's what I need to do to make sure that I like traveling. It's only, 5 months. I can make sure this is what I want. And then I'll like move on and go to this college and go to seminary and do all that. So yeah, so then that's how I ended up deciding to do a discipleship training school. So I filled out the application, got accepted, and the rest is history.
Yeah, because how many years now have you been with YWAM?
I think it's about like, because I took a couple years off in there. So I think it's about 14 or 15 years.
That's awesome. When it comes to purpose, how do you feel you really found your purpose, what God has for you?
I think one of the biggest things that I've learned with purpose and calling, and especially like I've worked with a lot of young adults and teenagers over the last like decade or so. And the biggest thing is your first purpose is to, love God.
Amen.
You know what I mean? Like our first calling is our relationship with Him. We were created for relationship with God and for relationship with other people. If you're not connected to our Creator, and if we're not connected to others, you're going to be lacking a huge component of what you were wired to do. But I think the second thing came a couple years into being in Youth with a Mission. I joined YWAM and I thought I was going to be a missionary in Romania because this girl that I heard at this conference was a missionary in Romania. Mm-hmm. So I thought joining staff with YWAM for a couple years was just like a stepping stone to getting to Romania. At the time, And then I wound up leading a missionary trip for 2 months in Romania. And I'm standing on this balcony, still thinking I'm going to be working with street kids in Romania someday. And I'm on this balcony in Romania, and I'm like, I don't want to be here. I just remember having this like straight up panic moment of like, I don't like, this was my whole life purpose for the last like 6 years, like from the time I was 13 until right now. And I'm like 20 or something. I don't know. And I was like, this is my life. What am I doing? And all of a sudden I just felt God, like, I was like, God, what am I supposed to do? And I felt like God just asked me, what do you want to do?
Ooh, it's good.
And I was like, I don't know. Like, I never thought of that. Like, and so like at the time I had recognized that I really enjoyed doing ministry with teenage girls and with women. And so that's what kind of ended up leading me into cosmetology and into a lot of the things I ended up doing later. But that driving question of like, what do you want to do? Is I think one of the biggest things for me with like finding purpose. I think we can get really fixated on like, oh, I have this call, or I want to do this massive thing. And then eventually you burn out because it's too much, or you get it and realize it's not what you wanted, or, all these things. And then our worlds come crashing down because we place so much of our identity in this thing when all God created you the way he created you with a purpose. Like he knows what you like and he knows what you want. And so if you're in step with him, if you're falling under that first purpose of relationship with God, if you're falling under the second purpose of having right standing with the people in your world, then doing what you want, that's your purpose.
Wow.
And so like, my purpose has changed. I've always been a missionary, but my purpose and what that looks like has changed 100 times over, maybe not 100, but I've been in a million different directions, and I don't, but none of it feels like aimless or purposeless to me. I feel like I've been walking out the plan that God has had for me the whole time. There's a speaker, he teaches, he has his own ministry, Lion Share. Dave Beering is his name, and he does discipleship ministry stuff, but he teaches in DTSs sometimes, and he does this thing called the seasons of life. In it, he talks about how your 20s is experimentation. Like you're just supposed to do a bunch of things, see what you like, see what you don't like, it's all about experimentation and developing your character, because your character is key. If you don't have character, your ministry is going to crumble in a second. Like how many times have we heard that story, And so that's what your 20s are for. And some people gain a lot of notoriety during that time and others don't. Your 30s are still heavily character building, but now you're stepping into a call of some sort. You're stepping into things. But he says that you really don't, his words are, hit your stride or really walk out with a ton of fruit until you're in your 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
That's when you like hit your stride. If you look at most people's life and like the seasons where they had the biggest fruit, it's not in their 20s typically. Like obviously like professional athletes are like a whole nother a different category, but most people like so for me it's right now I work with our summer youth program called Joshua Generation, and I love working with teenagers. And I grew, when I was younger, I was a camp counselor. And then I joked that when you're staffing these discipleship training schools, it's basically like a camp counselor for adults. And now I'm running a program for kids to get a missional experience in a camp kind of way. And I've said to people, this is the first time in my life that I felt like this is the thing I could die doing. But with the timeline of life, that tracks, right? Like I'm in my 30s now. So this is like when I'm hitting the point where like, this is the thing that could be the thing that produces the most fruit. But ultimately, as much as that's true, if my relationship with God is threatened, I need to bow out. And so I think like ultimately when it comes to purpose, over and over, the thing that I never want to lose sight of is that my first purpose is like to be in right relationship with God. And my second purpose is like, am I in right relationship with the people around me? Because we were created for that first and foremost, and everything else has to fall under that.
Wow, Courtney. Okay, you said so many good things in there, like so many. I have to break this down. So, you talked about number one, being connected with our creator. So, I think for people who are trying to find their purpose, it's definitely like having a relationship with God. And then you talked about like your time in Romania, and basically God was asking you like, what do you want to do? And I think I have a similar thing where I
Mm-hmm.
think it's Psalm 34:7. I might mess up the reference, but it says, like, delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. And
Mm-hmm.
when we actually are in relationship with God and we're delighting ourselves in him, I think a lot of times he doesn't choose for us. Like he's actually directing us, and he's kind of like a parent. Like a parent,
Mm-hmm.
once the kid is grown and out of the household, the parent isn't like making all of the decisions for the kid. They have to become an adult. You have to like make your own decisions, but God can guide you in that.
Mm-hmm.
It also makes me think too about the verse where it says like God's word is a light unto our path, and basically just taking a step out. And I've found in my own life that when I've taken a step out in faith, that kind of the path has gone clearer and like clearer. And you kind of touched on that too, how our purpose can be ever evolving. I just, I think it's so good, everything that you shared there. And you said earlier that this is something, I think you said it's something that you feel like you could just like die like doing, like you're just so happy enjoying what you're doing right now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. Everyone teases me that I come alive during JG.
Yeah.
Again, we love acronyms, so it's JG.
Joshua Generation. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So what are some, I think maybe those identifying things that people could say, okay, how do I know that I've found my purpose? I like the one thing that you just said. People say that you like come alive. What are some other?
I think it like comes, a lot of it is like, do you like it? You know, do you enjoy it? Is it something that even on the day where it sucks the most, you still want to go back and do it again? In the moment where you have the hardest relationship dynamic thing that you've experienced, but you still want to be continuing to do that thing. Like it's worth it to fight for that thing. And ultimately, is it drawing you closer to God?
Hmm,
Is it drawing you deeper into relationship with
yeah.
him, or is it taking you away from that in any way? But yeah, it's the things that like bring us joy. You know, we
Hmm.
were we were supposed to like be joyful people, and so when you're filled with joy, that's super important. And again, do you like it? I mean, it's funny. Like there's Mark. So there's my former base director at the location in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His name is Mark, and he's like Gen X or whatever, and I'm millennial.
Yeah. I'm
And
millennial
he like
too.
we talk a lot about like how Gen X does not care about fun. Like fun is not really a big part of like if they like something. Like they could like it, but they wouldn't necessarily say like, "Oh, I'm having fun." You know, where millennials we need fun. And so for me, I'm like, "Am I having fun?" But that doesn't track for every generation apparently.
Interesting. Interesting.
That gauge, but do you like it? Do you, and again, is it bringing you life? Is it bringing you closer to God? Are you because like for me it's like Joshua Generation isn't, every facet of it is not easy for me.
Yeah.
Some of my most difficult relationship moments happened in the midst of running Joshua Generation, because so right now, the Youth with a Mission Philadelphia campus is on a pretty big property. We can house around 300 people. I mean, that's sardining people, but we can house them. And we're on like some acreage, like a decent amount of acreage, especially for being in the city. We're on a decent amount of like land, so there's plenty of space where we can run game time, like all that kind of stuff, which is a huge blessing. And so we have the bases from Pittsburgh and Boston, which were all kind of like sister locations. The same couple started all three of our YWAM locations. And so all three of us come together to put this on. And in order to do that, it's a lot of dying to ourselves and dying to our egos and compromise and all those
Yeah.
like fun things that no one in and of our flesh enjoys. And so some of like the hardest relationship challenges have come during Joshua Generation. I'm not a very administrative person at all, actually. I'm not the most organized person. but I'm one of the coordinators, which means I'm doing a lot of admin and I'm doing a lot of organization, but it wipes me out at the end of the day to do those things. But I still want to do this.
Yeah.
And it still like brings life and brings joy in spite of not every facet of it being something that I love. And so I think that's like when you want to do the thing in spite of X, Y, and Z, and when you're being drawn closer to the Lord and growing, that's where you're like that's where it's like, oh, this is it. This is what I want to do.
Yeah, that's awesome because yeah, it's sometimes it's not comfortable. We are being stretched. We are growing in
Mm-hmm.
that process. How do you balance, I guess, just like not getting burnt out, making sure that your relationship is staying in first priority?
I mean, first, like obvious, like not, but sort of obvious. Like, make sure that you're spending your time with Jesus every day. It's a discipline, you know. It's like some days you're like you can't wait, you know. Some mornings, or I'm an evening person, so I do my quiet times. I typically do them more in the evenings than I do in the mornings. So some nights when I'm done with all things base, I'm like, I don't really want to. I just want to like, you know, watch some dumb show or read my book. But it's like, no, I'm gonna do it. And other days you're like, oh, I can't wait. This is like the time I've been waiting for all day. But it's like regardless of like which camp I'm falling into, like still doing it. Because if you don't, it's like and sometimes I feel like this is a common thing. It's like with it's any discipline, right? You skip one day, then you skip the next, then you skip the next, and then all of a sudden you're in this guilt shame spiral of like, oh my gosh, I never spent time with Jesus. It's the worst thing ever. And so it's just reminding ourselves, like reminding myself not to end up there. You know, it's like, okay, no, I maybe missed a day because of I was a bum, or maybe there was a more legit reason than that, but typically it's because I was a bum. But I'm going to do it tomorrow, or I'm going to do it now, you know? And so I think that's like the first thing, is just making sure that that relationship with God is my legitimate priority. Because it can be easy to unprioritize any relationship in our life, really, but especially like sometimes the more important ones are the ones that creep up on you worse. And then the second thing is I have a few other people in my life. It gets maybe whether or not any listener people have experienced this. Once you become more of a leader in any organization, movement, whatever you want to call it, once you're higher up, your circle of people that you are able to share everything with gets a little smaller, because there's information you have that not everyone should have. And so I've been really blessed. I have several of the staff members over at the other YWAM base that I was formerly at in Pittsburgh hold me accountable to watch myself, to make sure that I'm not getting burnt out or bitter or whatever the case might be. And they will call me out, and they'll be brutal with me when they need to be. And so I would say the other part is really having those people that are watching out for you and watching out for you because they care. I'm super blessed that I have these relationships, that I've known these people since 2006. So it's been, you know, over a decade that these individuals have been in my life and been calling me to like higher standards. But I'd say that's another really big one. And then lastly, just making sure that you're doing something life-giving, something that brings you life every day. I walk. I really like to go for walks. So I try to go for a walk every day, and I listen to dumb rewatch podcasts. That's my other thing that is my like decompressing. I listen to people talk about my favorite shows, but you know, it's those like things that what is it the thing that's gonna like bring you rest and bring you life? And a lot of times we think it's TV or vegging out or this kind of thing, but it's not. You know, those things don't actually bring you life or bring you real rest. They bring distraction.
I agree. I agree. It's really good. So you mentioned earlier that you've been to a couple places, Thailand, Romania. What are some other places that you've traveled to with YWAM, and maybe what was one of your like best or favorite experiences?
So I've actually traveled to 26 different countries with Youth with a Mission.
You have me
So,
beat.
so a lot of South America and Asia,
Mhm.
predominantly. And then I went to Mozambique and South Africa, Fiji and Samoa with Sharon.
Yes, that is true.
And then, but I think, oh gosh, it's there's a lot of places that wind up resonating with you for different reasons. I will say a lot of my traveling has been leading discipleship training school outreaches. So when that's the case, oftentimes I wind up a little more focused on my students and not as focused on the nation itself. Like obviously we're focused on like reaching out to the country, and I love traveling so much and love getting to know different cultures. And but I think there's like a handful of places that made like a deeper impression, and one of them is Cuba. I went to Cuba in 20 gosh, I think it was 2017 or 2018 thereabouts. And we worked with a church there, and it was we just became family more than any other hosts that I've ever spent. We were only there for 3 weeks. It wasn't like we were there for a year, months and months and months. We were there for 3 weeks, but they took care of us. We took care of them. Like I remember we would go for like a couple days at a time and go stay with like a church that was like a couple hours away. You can't legally like stay anywhere, so except for the hostels that you register with the government. And so we were going to like stay in these different places, and then but we'd always have to come back in order to make sure no one was getting in trouble. And also they can't, in those places, getting additional food can be tricky too, just because everything is pretty regulated. And so the one time I made a bad leader mistake on my end, and we went on this fun day and we swam in this river, had so much fun, and then we ended up in this like guava grove of like guavas and mangoes, and you could pick all this fruit. And so I picked all this fruit, and then my students were like, "Oh, can we eat it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, we can eat it." No, shouldn't have said that. You should wash your fruit before you eat it, folks.
Oh no.
So like half my team got sick. Yeah, not which should have been like a no duh, Courtney, but like I don't know. We were just having this like blissful day. We're in this guava grove in Cuba. I'm like, yeah, of course, let's eat some fresh fruit we just picked off a tree. Bad idea. So anyways, everyone ended up getting like sick, and we got back, and the mom of this like family were saying, they're like, "Oh my gosh, like come on in, we're gonna take care of you, here's some medicine." And all the team members were like, "We're home, mom's here." And it was just that like feeling. And so we had this incredible trip. We shared the gospel with so many people, and like the people that we were working with, they were in danger sometimes, because you're really not like you can it's a little gray in Cuba what you can and can't do, because they do have churches. You can be a Christian, but preaching isn't something that you can like that you can get in trouble for. But they were so game to go for it at the time, and then it was like one of our last nights, and our team was praying, and we ended up deciding to do like a foot washing thing with the hosts and stuff. And like all of us were bawling. Like the Holy Spirit was there. It was such a mesh of like these two cultures, and everyone was just bawling. And Cuban Spanish is probably, so I speak Spanish more or less. I translate for a lot of our trips and stuff. And Cuban Spanish was some of the hardest for me to understand. But like, again, I go back to that same thing. Like I didn't care, because it was just such an incredible experience being there. And so, yeah, Cuba will always hold like a very, very special place in my heart as a result of that experience.
That's really cool. I like to call those like almost like eternity moments. Like I feel like there's just like special
Mm-hmm.
moments that like kind of give you like a sneak peek of eternity. And I'm like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
just like something you can
Yeah.
really cherish.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It was great. Loved it. Food, Chile is one of my favorite places for food, in case you ever want to go on a trip just to eat food. I love Chile.
Okay, now I feel like I have to ask you because you kind of gave a travel tip there. Like, don't eat fruit that isn't been washed. What are like maybe your top three travel tips?
Okay, let's see here. Top three. Always pack underwear in your carry-on.
Oh,
I feel like, again, kind of a no-brainer one, but always, always, always pack underwear in your carry-on. Underwear, toothbrush, deodorant, carry-on, always. Second travel tip. Gosh, I'm trying to think what else is like I mean, a lot of mine are outreach tips. So it's not just like travel. It's like when you're roughing it a little bit. And so
Yeah.
baby powder is your best friend. Baby
Yeah.
powder has
Yeah.
many baby powder, and dryer sheets have a ton of uses. If you buy yourself lavender dryer sheets, it keeps pests away, keeps your clothes fresh, can double as like bug spray. Just rub that on you if you really run out of your bug spray. And baby powder can be used in your shoes, can be, like these are very versatile items that
Yes.
I always bring with me.
You made me think of when we went to Fiji and Samoa, I had like a car wash towel
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was like my actual towel because it was like super absorbent and very small and you could pack it into like a tiny space, and that is what I use to dry myself.
Yeah, I've since then I've upgraded to the Turkish towels,
The what towels?
because like the Turkish towels,
Okay.
they're like they're I don't know, they're still, you can find them on like Amazon, anywhere, but like they're thin, but they're super absorbent, and they can double as like a blanket or a beach towel or something to lay on the ground with. They're very versatile and
Okay.
they're wonderful.
Okay, I'll have to check that out.
So get, yeah, if you, and they pack small. They pack
That's
small.
awesome. If someone has been listening and they're like, wow, like your purpose, maybe they're listening and they feel like they've kind of fallen like too far away from God, or maybe they're just confused about what their purpose is, what would you like say to encourage them?
I mean, I think if it's you've fallen away from God, do whatever you got to do to get back. I have a friend recently. She was in med school, and then she was in a residency program, and she just graduated like a couple days ago. And she was telling me like for the duration of her residency program, because for she was an emergency med, so that means that your schedule is super wonky. She couldn't get to church. She wasn't really surrounded by very many people that like were serving the Lord, blah, blah, blah. And she was just talking to me. She's like, oh my gosh, Courtney, like it's so hard to like get back into reading the Bible. Like I didn't realize how confusing this could be. She's like, I've been reading my Bible every day from the time I was like, middle school until like she got into a residency program, and then a residency program just kind of kicked her in the butt a little bit with time management kind of stuff. And so honestly, I recommended just I'm doing these like little teen devotionals for our camp. Like I'm giving every kid one of those to go home with, so then they can all kind of be doing the same devotional together after the camp ends for the next 30 days. And I told her, honestly, these are super easy. They give you like Bible reading, they give you thoughts, and then they give you like, how do you practically apply this? And so like, I guess like, so that's my first thing, is just whatever it takes to get back into it. And don't be embarrassed by like how simple that might be. Don't think that you need to start running if you haven't even been walking for a while. Just start somewhere and start with what makes sense to you and what you can do. I tell people a lot, especially when they're like, after you've done a discipleship training school and during your DTS, your staff makes you have time with the Lord every day. It's like, okay, this half hour, this hour is carved out for you to go spend time with the Lord. And so when people go back home, no one's telling them like, you have this hour to go do that. You have to figure it out your own self. And so I tell people all the time, like, if all you have is 10 minutes, give those 10 minutes fully to Jesus. And little by little, you can grow in that discipline. So that's it. Like, if you've like fallen away, don't feel like whatever, there's no shame in it. Just do what you can and get back to it. As far as purpose stuff goes, I think my biggest thing is don't get so hung up on it. I think kind of like what you were saying earlier, Sharon, where you were talking about like, just take a step. It's like if you genuinely want God's will for your life, and if you are in right relationship with him, he's not going to just like, you're not going to take a step and he's going to be like, oh, well, that wasn't exactly right, so now you're out of your purpose and out of my will. Like, he's a loving God. That's not it. Like, if you take a step and it isn't it, like, try a different step, change directions. You don't have to get so, I think we get so hung up on like, this is the thing that I'm going to do that's going to change the world, and like it has to be this thing. And it's like that might not be the case. I started a cosmetology focused discipleship training school in Pittsburgh they're still running it, but with very few students. And it can feel really like sad to me if I get too caught up, like, oh, I did this thing and now it's like not even a thing. But then I talk to the girls that went through it that are still serving the Lord, that it changed their lives in these incredible ways. And it's like, yeah, it doesn't have to be this big, huge thing. Our purpose, like your purpose might not be something that changes the world that you can see immediately. But if it changed someone's world, and you enjoyed it, that's all that super matters. Obviously we have to like make money or, like take care of your responsibilities, all those kinds of things. But beyond that, like, yeah, I think when we talk about purpose, a lot of times people get paralyzed because they feel like they're going to miss it. And I just don't really think it's that easy to miss it. I think it's a lot harder to miss it than it is to find it.
Yeah. That's so good, Courtney. There's a teacher I listen to that says like God's at least as good as a GPS, which basically it's like, if you get off track, God can recalculate. Like
Mm-hmm.
what you just said, like, about you can't like miss it and not being so afraid. It's been awesome having you on the show. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
So really all I have is I don't have like a website. I don't have a bunch of stuff. I just have Instagram and I'm just Philly Courtney, Philly_Courtney on Instagram. If you wanted more information about Youth with a Mission, there's ywam.org. Specifically Philadelphia, ywamphiladelphia.org, ywampittsburgh.org. They're all just ywamblah.org. So if you want more information about that, you can do that. If you want more information about Joshua Generation, we're joshuagenerationofficial.com.
Awesome. Well, guys, go ahead and check that out. And thank you again, Courtney, for being on today.
Yeah, of course. It was fun.
The show notes for today's episode are available on my blog at yourcreativeforce.com, as well as other resources and inspiration to go after your dreams.